Hi friends and companions along this path of spiritual practice. We've been considering that meta-duality called self and other. It's everywhere about us in the world. In navigating that duality, Zen Buddhism understands that our minds stop at understanding. Our minds tend to stop at perception. Unfortunately, both the understanding and the perception tend to be the self's understanding and the self's perception much more than the mutuality of a shared understanding and perception. From Greek mythology, I love that imagery of the gray ones, the three sisters. They're each blind, but they share a single eye. And so they pass that eye one to the next. And the imagery reminds me that our seeing is always a shared seeing, that my sense of self is always a borrowed one from the other, that our speaking is rooted in a shared literacy and language. Yet all too often, understanding and perception lands heavily on my understanding and my perception. Zen Buddhism enters into a practice of questioning and wondering, a kind of wondering that asks for an orientation to openness. It calls the self out into this open terrain, this mutual terrain between self and that mysterious other. A kind of questioning and wondering that insists on not being suppressed by dominant ideology or dominant opinions. It refuses a premature closure of that openness. This wondering from Zen Buddhism that with practice quiets our judgments, our glib commentary and our opinions. And it asks us to stay out there in the opening, to experience something. Experience asks for the immediacy or the intimacy of what is occurring before we distance ourselves into perception and into understanding. Experience is about that intimacy, whereas understanding and even how we perceive requires a certain degree of distancing. You and I have had this experience. A friend is telling their story, and as they tell their story back then about those events and facts, in our mind, we also mirror that with something similar from our past. And we stay at the level of events, of facts and dates. But then as our friend goes from those facts and events to a deeper, more intimate level of meaning, of emotions, the same mirroring takes place in our own minds as we move into our own meaning, our own emotions. And then at some point for my friend, if the story is a powerful one, the story with its meaning and emotions is not about back then. My friend is actually experiencing that story, that meaning, that emotion now. And if I can stay in that open experience, I'm able to accompany my friend to the experiencing of those meanings and emotions now. And ultimately, for my friend and for me, the story contains the most profound sorrow and the most exuberant joy. And if I can accompany my friend to that place of pain and joy now, then the self and other enters into the gift of mutuality. But you and I know every step of this mirroring journey, the self can change the topic. When the self feels like this is becoming too difficult, a sorrow for me, I change the topic. In this duality of practicing with self and other, how do we practice so that our mind goes beyond what we already know and understand? How do we even go beyond how our minds prefer to perceive what's going on? So I want to leave us with a practice which many of you will recognize as simply another variation on meditation. Take a pen. And then the practice is going to ask us to simply to experience this pen. If you find that your mind wants to tell a story, a wonderful memory involving a pen, let it go by just shaking it off. There's nothing wrong with thoughts occurring. That's what our brains tend to do. But thoughts occurring is very different than our chasing after those thoughts into a story, into a problem that I need to figure out somehow. Just stay with a pen. When a story arrives and you find yourself chasing after something, just shake it off. Once you get good at just shaking off stories or some prior understanding, let's make it a little bit more challenging. See if you can even shake off perception. When the mind verbalizes the word pen, or it's long, or the color of this, all these myriad forms of perception, just shake it off and go back to experiencing. So if there's a story, if there's a naming, a perceiving of this, just shake it off. As you practice this, you'll notice that the stories quiet. And at some point, even the word pen and all the 1,000 perceptions your brain wants to produce will start to quiet. And what expands is this opening to just being with this. And a quality becomes present in this opening. This quality of, what is this? Without the verbalization, of course, what is this? Just this quality of wondering. And so, friends, we continue with our practice.